Go ahead and start. And let me share my screen. And please feel free to interrupt me. I'll stop periodically to ask questions or make sure everybody's understanding it. But in the meantime, don't hesitate to speak up. Okay, so can everybody see the Beyond the Basics?
Yep.
Okay, great. We're going to be talking today, this is lesson 2, we're going to be talking today about research. And I'm sure a lot of you have already done a lot of research, so you're all at varying places, but it's time to get to work on research, but then you go, yay, I'm ready to work, but then how do I do this? Where do I begin? What do I start with? You have this tree that you want to extend and strengthen, but really, how do you go about that? So today, by the end of this class, you'll be able to check your existing tree. And that is, a lot of you have entered a lot of data into Family Search. And maybe you've gone back far enough that you've hooked up to other people's work. And that's really exciting when you hook into the big, collaborative tree and see that there are other people helping you and that are working on that line with you. But we need to make sure, we need to check every connection. And that is every person that's in the tree need to make sure that we have the right parents for them, because one missed connection and you're going up the wrong tree and you're doing work for somebody else, but not for you. And so we need to make sure that we've got every connection is correct. And if you're like me, before I, got my degree, I was just, doing this as a hobby. And I think the hardest thing to know is, have I proven this connection? How do I know that this is correct? And so we'll talk a lot about that during the course of the class, during the course of all of the classes. So by the end of this class, you should have some really good analytical tools that will let you analyze and make sure that you're on the right tree. In the meantime, there are things that you can start doing now. There's somebody else. Let me let them in. Oh. I can't do that. Hold on just a second. Hey, Carrie Ann, are you there? Okay, anyway. Okay, I hope they got in the class. Anyway, so we're going to learn about how to check your tree and every connection in your tree. But right now we're going to start with a fairly simple exercise where you're going to use research helps and also U.S. Census records. Now, some of you may not have a lot of people in the U.S., so I'm primarily today speaking to people that have a good portion of their tree that is in the U.S. If you don't have a good portion of your tree in the United States, then contact me after class and we'll talk about other ways to start verifying what you've got in your tree. But for anybody that has U.S. ancestors, it is really imperative that you find them in every available U.S. census. Okay, U.S. Census records, it really is, I think every genealogist will agree that U.S. Census records are the foundation to every good U.S. pedigree. What does it give you? Well, you get, with census records, you get a snapshot of your family every 10 years. No, there are no pictures in censuses. I wish there were, but you really can read a lot from censuses about, what your ancestors were doing, where they were, what their family looked like. You learn an awful lot. We spend a lot of time finding those names, dates, and places. but we also like to find the added, information about the family that helps us to get to know them a little better. As we say, put flesh on the bones, try to figure out what their lives were like, and census records really do that. So as a brief history of the federal census, you're probably aware that the census is in the Constitution, that we have a census every 10 years. So it's not going anywhere. They started in 1790 and took the first census between 1790 and then every 10 years. So 1800, 1810, 1820. For the first 50 years, it was the name of the head of household only. It's not till we get to the 1850 census that we have everybody named that's in the household. And then every year from 1850 on, there are different questions asked about the family. So it's kind of fun to see, what they're asking, and see what that information helps us with in looking at our families. So primarily, the 1790 to 1840 censuses are great for locating the family geographically if we don't know where they are, but it doesn't tell you, names of everybody in the household. Starting with 1850, we do. And so mostly we want to look at the 1850 on, and that would be 1850, 1860, 1870, 1880. Tragically, the 1890 census was destroyed by fire. And so we can't do that. We've got a big gap between 1880 and 1900. The 1900 census is actually my favorite because of the questions that they asked, and maybe we'll get into that later. The 1940 census is the last census that's been fully indexed and digitized. And this is due to privacy reasons. They don't want to have all this information about living people out there. So 1940 is out there. I'm not in it quite yet, but 1950 has been released, and volunteers are working on completing the index to that. It's been digitized. Let me see if I can let in John. Hold on just a second. Okay, anyway. Hope. Hey, Carrie Ann, are you there? Okay, she let him in, I think. Okay. John, are you with us?
Yes.
Okay, great. Welcome. So your mission, should you decide to accept, is to find each of your U.S. ancestor in the available censuses. For example, if your ancestor was Jane Jones and she was born in 1837 and she died in 1901, you'll want to find Jane in the 1850 census. She's going to be 13 years old, probably living with her parents. The 1860 census, she'll be 23 years old. She may be married at that point, and sometimes that it's hard to jump to the married information. But in 1860, she'll be 23, 33 in 1870, 43 in 1880, and then there's no 1890. So in the 1900, that would be the last one you'd find her, because she died in 1901, so she's not there for the 1910. So you're going to have 5 censuses to find Jane in, and it will give you a lovely picture of her life. Okay, so how do you do that? So here we are. This is my homepage on Family Search. The first step to do is you're going to want to click on Family Tree in the upper left-hand side, and then from the menu, choose Tree. And here's my fan chart tree. So if you go to your tree and it doesn't look like this, make sure you're in the fan chart mode. I've put 7 generations for mine. And then I've put in, for the options, I've put in birthplace. So this fan chart is showing you where my ancestors were born. The blue is in the United States. So you can tell I've done a lot of work with census records. Even those that are in the yellow and in the pinkish and the dark pinkish, all of those were born in other countries, but they spent a lot of time in the United States. So there's still a lot of census work, even in the colors that aren't blue. So this is an easy way for you to gauge. Go to your fan chart and do the birthplace and see who's born in the United States. Yeah, is there a question? Anybody? Okay, so that's a great way to give you an overview of your tree and to be able to tell who you need to find census records for. Now, some of those way back in my tree, they're not going to be around during census records. So it's not all of these people, but you can tell that. Okay. There are several different ways to find census records. I call it intentional versus guided research. Guided research is the easiest, so we're going to try that first. We're going to look at examples of each of these so that you'll know what they are and so that you can choose for yourself. Basically, intentional research is where you choose, I want to look for this person in this census, and so I'm going to go to this census and search for them. With guided research, you're going to go to that person and let Family Search find the census record for you. So if it's not making sense, yes, I think by the time we're done today that you'll understand. Okay. So should you use Ancestry or Family Search? Now, in my opinion, Ancestry has a superior search function to Family Search. And you can access Ancestry for free if you'll go to a family history center or even affiliate libraries. You get free access to Ancestry and other paid websites. So having said that, I'm not likely to go to the Family History Center. And so I think everybody's going to want to try to do it from home with Family Search. And so we're going to look at both of those today. And I think with our case studies, you're going to get a feel for what Family Search can do for you and maybe what Ancestry can do for you too. So here's our case study. We're going to start with the 1850 US Census. Now, usually with your trees, you're going to be going from the known to the unknown. So you're going to probably be starting with the 1940 census and working backwards, but we're going to go back way to the 1850 census for this case study. We're going to be looking for I think he's my great-great-grandfather, Martin Luther Moyer, who was born in 1848 in South Carolina. His parents were Jacob and Susan Franklin Moyer. So this is going to be intentional research and one way of doing intentional research. Okay, so I'm going to go to search. This is the homepage of Family Search, and I'm going to click on search, and I'm going to choose records. And then now if I were to put in Martin Luther Moyer's name in that box by search historical records, that would be guided research. That's Family Search taking this name, the information that I put in, and they're going through all the records that they have to see if there's a match. And you're going to get census records, and you're going to get a whole lot of other things. Intentional research, you're going to go down to the lower left-hand side to find a collection. And you're going to choose the United States Census 1850, and you'll see that it will pop up, and then you can click on that. And then this page appears, the United States Census, and you can search that specifically. So that's very intentional. So for this first time, I put in Martin Moyer. I put in place, South Carolina is the place, and I put in 1848 for the year. And let's see what Family Search finds for me. Well, they find a Samuel M. Moyer, who was born in 1823 in New York, and he's living in Georgia. That's not the right one. So I'm not sure why they every search engine has a different algorithm for how they choose people. That's not the right one. Okay. So further attempts, I go back to that box and I put in Luther as the first name. I put in Luther Moyer, no results. I expand the birth range to 1845 to 1855. I still don't get any results. I tried Martin Luther as the first name and then no last name. And Family Search gives me, how many is that? 15,803 results. Well, I'm not going to slog through all of those. But I do look at the first couple, and I notice a Martin L. Myers, who's born in 1848 in South Carolina, and he's in Edgefield. And I happen to know that Edgefield is where the Moyers ended up. So that looks like a pretty good possibility. So I look at Martin L. Myers. Now I use this example as to show you that you kind of, there's a little bit of luck involved with this. If I'd seen the 15,000 and said, okay, let's try something else, I wouldn't have noticed the Martin L. Myers. I don't recommend that you slog through 15,803 entries here. But, maybe taking a glance might be the right thing to do. Okay. So this is what they show me about Martin L. Myers. If you look down at the bottom, it says there's a Jacob Myers and a Susan Myers. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm really onto something now. Before we're going to view the original document, and you always view the original document. But before we go to that, look on the right-hand side, and Family Search is saying, okay, if this is the right person, then we think we found these other things. And one of them is a death thing, but there's a United States Census in 1860 for Martin Luther Moyer. So once you find him, there might be a domino effect of, okay, you're going to find others and you don't have to go through this search every time. So keep in mind that that's really helpful. That can cut your search time down really well. So, okay, so this is in fact the correct family, and I'm going to go to, this is what the whole census page looks like. But if you can look at the family, in the top left-hand side, it has the family number, the household number and the family number. Then it says Jacob Myers, age 35. He's male. He's a farmer. He has $400 worth of real estate, so property, and he was born in South Carolina. Now, notice that the 1850 census doesn't indicate relationships. The 1880 on does. So it would say Jacob Myers, head of household, Susan, wife, and then the children. So we're just inferring now these relationships because it doesn't state that for us. But it does look like Jacob is the head of the household and that Susan is his wife. She's 32 years old. She's a female, and she was born in South Carolina. And then we've got the children, Paulina and Julia and Edward and Susan M. and Margaret. And there's Martin L., and he's 2 years old. And then Polly Myers. And, best guess is that maybe she's Jacob's older sister who's never married. And so, we're just guessing at this point because it doesn't really say. But you can see we found a lot about Martin's family at this point. He's in a farming family. It's a fairly big family. Okay. Are we done there? No, we're not. We're going to squeeze everything we can out of this census. And so we're going to try to always look at adjacent pages for more family members and just to get a feel for the community. So we look on another page and we see a Jessie Franklin. Now remember that Jacob Moyer was married to a Susan Franklin, and she was 32. This Jessie is 38. Our guess would be that Jessie's her brother, and that would be correct. Here's her brother on another page with his wife and his children. On another page, we find a B. Franklin, a Bartlett Franklin, and a Bartlett Franklin. Well, the B. Franklin stands for Burgess Franklin, and Bartlett Franklin. Those are two other brothers of Susan, and then the Bartlett and Elizabeth are her mother and father. So you get a feel for, okay, these are people that they're in a community. They all know each other pretty well. They get married and stay close to home and raise their families next to each other. Now, something we ought to mention at this point is that the numerator, the person taking the census, back then, I'm sure you've all received census questionnaires in the mail or maybe online that you've filled out. Back in the day, the census, the enumerator would go door to door, would go to the house. And so when they're next to each other on the census record, you can pretty well figure that that's the next farm over, and they're just going from farm to farm. And so it's a lovely snapshot of this whole family. On another page, we see Levi Myers. This is Levi Moyer, and he's Jacob's younger brother with his wife and children. He's also a farmer. They're all farming in South Carolina. So that was successful, the 1850. We found in 1850 that Martin Luther Moyer was listed he appeared as Martin L. Myers. In 1860 and 1920, I find him as Martin L. Moyer. In 1870, he was Martin L. Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R. In 1880, he was Luther Moyer. In 1900, he was M. Luther Moyer. And in 1910, he was Luther Mayer. And so anybody want to say what searches you could do? I mean, I'm thinking, looking at this, looking back on what I could use, if I did an M and then an asterisk, meaning one or more letters, and then ER, that would get Martin L. Mayer in 1870. It would get Luther Moyer in 1880. It would get the 1900 and 1910. And the only one that I think it wouldn't get is the one with the S on the end. And so again, even that the name, my name is Griffith. Sometimes people call me Griffiths, so try that. If it's a name that people might put an S on, try the S on. You got to be creative sometimes to find this.
I have a question.
I have a question.
Sure.
The spelling of the last name changes, and it may be the enumerator is changing the name and not the person.
Yeah.
Good point. So they're just going by, they're writing as they hear it. Now imagine Moyer said with a very thick Southern accent, Moya, it sounds a little bit like Meyer, doesn't it? So it might have been somebody out of the community that didn't know they were Moyers. With this particular family, they came to Abbeville, South Carolina, and they actually went by M-A-Y-E-R. Then everybody that moved to Edgefield from then on went by Moyer. So, but the family that stayed in Abbeville, they stayed M-A-Y-E-R, and that one line went by Moyer. Another thing that I think you're probably referring to is that there was no correct way to spell names up until, there was no correct way to spell anything up until about the time of the Civil War. I've seen a document written by George Washington that spells table, T-A-B-E-L. And you think, oh, George, you didn't know how to spell. Well, no, there was no such thing as a correct way to spell back then. There was no dictionary. There was just, it wasn't codified like it later became. So that adds to, you need to be more creative because they were writing it as they heard it. The enumerators were, they didn't necessarily know how to spell it. That goes for first names as well. This is a really good time to say, there are mistakes on census records, and you will find them as you do this work. And just kind of, let it roll off your back, take it with a grain of salt. A nice thing about having it every 10 years is usually there's, you can kind of put everything together and say, well, that one was wrong, but all the others are consistently saying this, so we can bank on this. But they're not always right. It's as good as the enumerator. And then think about who answered the door that day. Is it, is it an 18-year-old kid who, was home getting a drink of water from the farm and didn't really know where grandma was born? Or was it an older person? Was it the mother-in-law that didn't know as much about her daughter-in-law as she did about her son? It's only as good as the enumerator and the information that was given to the enumerator, and then the transcription. So there are a lot of places for error along here. So just be aware of that. It's still a fabulous resource, but it's not perfect.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I love looking at census records. Mine is a mining community of my family, part of my family.
Yeah.
And in New Mexico and Arizona.
Okay.
And of course, the misspellings in Spanish are always there.
Oh, I bet.
But I love looking at the record with all the other family members that are there and the brothers and sisters. And then, but my question is, what do I do with all this stuff? Do I put it someplace? Do I keep it? I'm fascinated by it, but then I don't know what to do with it.
Okay. Well, let's think about the families that I found around them. I could actually go to Susan Franklin and tentatively put in her father and mother as Bartlett and Elizabeth in Family Search, right? I don't have that proof yet, and I certainly don't see her as a child in their family. Hopefully I find other records that will corroborate this. But, you know, tentatively you could put in Bartlett and Elizabeth and then put in Burgess and Bartlett and what was the other one, Jesse? And so you've got her natal family, you know, filled out a little bit. There are probably other children that we didn't see, married daughters perhaps, you know, that were in different families. And unfortunately, since that's the 1850, we can't go back to an earlier census where they were all children in that one family. But you'll have to look at other records to prove and to fill out that family. But you can start to organize these family groups. And that's lovely. We now know that Martin Luther probably had a brother named Levi, and we know his approximate birth date. So all of these are really helpful as we put in together these family groups. Trying not to go too far astray, but it's really helpful to get the brothers and sisters, because if I am working backwards, and let's say, let me think of an example. Let's say I'm trying to find who Martin Luther Moyer's parents were, and I'm not seeing any Moyers or Myers in the 1850 that are of the age to be, well, we have his parents, don't we? So let me use Jacob. We don't see anybody that's of the age to be Jacob's parents. So what do we do with that? Well, it could be that Martin, none of the records that I can find for Martin would link him to his parents. But if I know that Levi is his brother, and then I find a record that shows me who Levi's parents are, bingo, we've gotten Martin's parents. So it's real important, even though it's not going to help you. Well, it might help you extend your line backwards, but you want to get all those family members if you can. I just like to think of it as this is a family group, and these are people that my direct line ancestor grew up with, and they would know them as, you know, aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews. And so I'd like to get that flavor of the whole picture and the whole family, but it can also be really helpful in your research moving back. So try to gather this information. And if you're reticent to put it in Family Search because you don't really know it's true, you know, write it down on a piece of paper. If you've got genealogy software, you can put it in your own personal software and then write a note. I'm not really sure about this yet, but I need to find records that will corroborate this. So very good question. Any other thoughts at this point? Okay. Okay, we're going to go to case study number 2 now. And if you remember Frederick Stell from last week, my paternal grandfather, we're going to look for him. I looked in the sources for him, and you can see I've got him in the household in 1900 in James William Stell's household. So I have him in the 1900 census. I have him in the 1910 census. I have him 1917, 1919, 1919, 1930. So I have skipped the 1920 census. I've got him in the 1940, but I'm missing the 1930 census. So I want to look for Fred Stell in 1930. Was it 1930 or 19? It was 1920, wasn't it? Sorry, the 1920 census. Now, another way of doing this, you know, before we went to search and we went to records and then looked at the specific census, I'm going to click on Family Search. When I'm on Frederick Stell's person page, if I click on Family Search, it'll come up with all sorts of records that, according to Family Search, may apply to Frederick Stell. So I click on that, and this is the page that I see. And there are some records that appear to be him, but I'm not seeing the census record. There's a 1900 census record right away. So, and there, how many? There are 952 results. I'm going to filter that down by clicking on collection. And when I click on collection on the right-hand side, you can see that I can choose censuses. I can filter out all the non-census hits that I got for Frederick Stell. So I'm going to click on that census. And this is what I get. I get a Stelz. And in looking at it, this is not correct. This is not Fred Stell. So where do I go from here? Well, if you look on the right-hand side, it looked for Frederick Stell. It also looked for Fred Stell. That would be my next try, would be to try Fred Stell. And I could put information in on the right, change the information and try it again. But it's already looked for Fred, so that's not going to help. So it's time to try Ancestry.com. So I'm going to go to Ancestry. And this is my homepage on Ancestry. I'm going to click on search. I'm going to choose the card catalog. Then from the card catalog, I'm going to put in 1920 federal census. And that's just a shortcut rather than putting in United States federal census every time. I found that if I put in 1920 census, it would give me a lot of censuses from Wisconsin and from a lot of that I'd have to scroll through and find. But if you put in the year and then federal census, that usually just gives you a really short list of censuses as the result. This one happens to just give you one, the 1920 United States federal census. I click on that. And I'm going to enter the information now. This is the search page. I put in Fred with an asterisk, meaning that would anybody named Frida, if it's Frederick or Frederick or Frederica or anything Fred and then Fredola, anything you can think of, it's going to come up with everything. I've chosen exact there. I could have chosen sounds like or similar or initials. But I thought that I want to be exact on the Fred part because I don't want, something other than Fred to come up. Then on the last name on Stell, I could do exact, but I know that in Family Search, they had some problem finding Fred in the 1920 census. So I'm going to say, look for exact, look for sounds like, look for similar. This should bring in still, steel, stall, a lot of different things, and even the sound X. Then I'm going to put in his birth, 1898, but then go plus or minus 5. When you think about it, in the census record, if they give their age that they were at the time of the census, then it may not be the correct birth year as you're calculating out. For instance, Fred in 1920 should be 22 years old, but his birthday's late in the year. If it was taken in April, he would only be 21 years old. So if I'm looking for exact 1898, it's not going to find Fred for me. So give it a little leeway. I usually do plus or minus 1 or 2. If it's a real common name, you're going to want to narrow, keep it as narrow as possible. So I would try the plus or minus 1 or plus or minus 2. If it's not a common name like Stell, then I feel free to do plus or minus 5 and not worry about all of the, hundreds of answers, possible suggestions that they might come up with. And then I put in, he was born in Colorado, and I want to find the Fred Stell that's born in Colorado. So I put exact. Now, if nothing came up with this, then you might want to unexact the Colorado, because for some reason they may have put in that he was born in somewhere else. Okay, so here are the 3 results that I got. Fred Stell, a Frederica F. Shadle, and a Fred D. Shadwell. I think those last 2 are probably sound X hits for Stell. But the first one is correct because my grandma was Anna. Woodland Park looks familiar because my Uncle Ted was born there. So that's the correct one. Now, Fred Still, why didn't Family Search find Fred Still when it was so close to Fred Still? I don't know. But let's talk about where we go from here. So I found Fred Stell. I click on this entry, and I want you to look real carefully. This is a quick lesson in paleography, in handwriting. This has been transcribed as S-T-I-L-L, and you can see that you can't really see a loop in the E and L. I should have moved over that circle a little bit, but look how he writes his E's in Fred. And go down to the head in the next column down below. That E, it's not an E like we would do our cursive now. It's more like a backwards 3, isn't it? And that's how some people wrote E's back then. And so knowing that, I would say that this record has been mistranscribed. It really does say S-T-E-L-L. They should have put, if they thought this was an I, they should have put Frid still, right? Because that E is pretty much exactly the same in both Fred and Still. So this has been mistranscribed. This tells me why Family Search didn't find it, because it's not spelled like the way what I was looking for. So what do you do with that? And how do I go about attaching this to my Family Search tree? So, okay, here's a better view. Here's another one. That is actually another one of Fred. This is another one that transcribed. This is the 1910 census that transcribed this as S-T-I-L-L. And you can see they're just not seeing it right. They're not looking at that kind of backwards 3. That's the E that this, who knows, it might have been the same enumerator in 1910 as it was in 1920. No, probably not, because it's in a different place. But anyway, that's how they used to write their E's. So be aware of that. And if you're having trouble with handwriting, if you're looking at a name or anything in an old document, try to look at that handwriting throughout the page and see, okay, I don't know what that letter is, but let me look at some names that I know what they're saying and see if I can find a letter that looks like that in another word that that could tell me what that letter is. It's kind of a puzzle. It's kind of you're solving a mystery there. It's kind of a puzzle there. Okay, so here's the 1920 census for Fred Stell. Oops. If I'm going to go back. Let me go back to where I was. Okay, so you can't really see this very well because it's the large page, but when you're on this page, are any of you familiar with RecordSeek? Anybody? So I have downloaded a program called RecordSeek, and if you don't know about it, I can shoot you an email to tell you about it. It's a really easy way of putting sources from other websites into Family Search. So you can see I've circled up at the top of my page RecordSeek. I'm going to click on that while I'm on this census page. And I find this, it says create a source, and I'm going to create a source for Family Search. They will also create sources for Ancestry, and both of those websites have different parameters for their sources. So it's going to be a different looking source. So I'm going to click on Family Search. And this page comes up. It says the source title is ancestry.com. And then it has the link for this. And it also, it shows the source and it shows the link. Now, on Describe the Record, it says the source created by recordseek.com. Because you're putting this source into Family Search, and because this is a paid website that other people might not be able to access the original either, this is what I like to do. I go back to the census record and I look at the transcription on the right, even though it's mistranscribed, and I copy and paste that. And then I go back to the RecordSeek, Describe the Record notes, and I put in, this is for people who click on the link and then don't want to pay to see this record, describing the record in more detail. Fred Stell, mistranscribed as Fred Still, 1920 census, and then has all the information for them that they can read out that you get in this record. So I'm going to click on next, and then it asks me, okay, it says we're going to go to Family Search now and attach this source to a person. Tell me about the person you want to attach it to. Well, the easiest way to do that is to go to Family Search, go to Fred Stell's page, click on his identification number. And when you click on that, the blue copy ID appears. And if you click on that, it'll say ID copied. And so you don't have to write down the letters and then, write them back in. So then I have that his identification number copied. I go back to the RecordSeek page and I search by ID number, and it says we're going to attach this source to Fred Stell, and then I do yes. And so it's been attached. I can either attach it to another person, and I'd actually want to do this. I would click on attach to another person and then go back. Who else was in the record? Well, Anna, his wife, was in the record. I can go ahead and attach this source to her and, get everybody in the family at the same time. For this one, it was only Anna. So right now I go to Fred Stell, and lo and behold, I'm looking at 1920 and I'm not seeing, okay, where's the record? Well, down at the very bottom, it's added the ancestry.com, but I'm going to want to add the year because I like to see all of the sources in chronological order, in year order. So I add the 1920, and there it appears in chronological order. So in 1920, it does show the ancestry.com census. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, so
sorry, Sue, just real quick, I am putting 2 YouTube channels in the chat that show you how to attach RecordSeek on your computer and then using RecordSeek to attach sources. So
excellent.
Watch those 2 YouTubes. They're very helpful. And like Sue said, this is an amazing resource.
Game changer. Thank you, Carrie Ann. That's awesome. Okay, now looking in detail at what RecordSeek has put in. It's put in the URL for, if people can get to Ancestry, they can look at it, but it's got my notes there too. It's got everything that you'd want in that source. Another way to do it is to go back. Now, since I know from Ancestry, I found, okay, it's Fred Still. I can go back to the page where we were looking for Fred Stell in the 1920 census, and I can put in instead, let's check for Fred Still. And lo and behold, they find him. Okay, they recognize Fred Still. So now, without using RecordSeek, I can go to Fred Stell, and I'd look at that and make sure that it's right. But I can also put in the census from Family Search. Let me see here. Oh. I must have missed something because I thought I told you how to do that. Okay. Let me move. Okay, voila, Fred Still. Okay. So it's been attached, but I thought I told you how to do that. Okay, maybe we do that later. If we don't show you how to attach from Family Search later in the presentation, I'll go back at the end if we've got time. Okay. Okay, sorry, I left you for a while. Okay, let me go back to the right place. I thought that I had shown you how to attach this from from Family Search, but it doesn't look like I did. So I can do that later because there were some questions before about how to attach from Family Search. Okay, so we're going to go. Let me see. No, I didn't. Okay. All right. Okay. What is genealogical research? It consists of finding what records are available for a time period and geographic location. So we're going to talk a lot about that, mostly next time. We're going to find out how to access those records and then access them, and then how to read and interpret the records in order to add the information to ancestral information. That is the process of genealogical research. So it's research launching time. How do you decide on your tree where you want to go? Let's say you've already done all that census research and you've got, everybody that's in the United States well documented and good sources for them. You want to go with your interest. You probably have an interest in one line over another for whatever reason. And you want to start out easy because you're going to get better as you go along, but let's not start out with the hardest problem. So how do you know what is easy? Okay, let's talk about the different factors that go into making research easy or difficult. We've already talked a lot about the surname, the spelling of the surname, but surnames, you've probably done enough research by now to know that you'd rather have an ancestor named Engelbert Humperdinck than John Smith, right? Because if you find Engelbert, you know for sure that that's your ancestor. You could find 100 John Smiths and still not be sure that that's the ancestor that you're looking for. So the unique surname is really, really great. So on your chart, if you're looking for easy, you might not want to start with the Smith line. You might want to start with a little more distinctive line. We've talked about spelling and how, we need to be creative with that. Another factor that makes a family easier to trace is geographic stability. If you've got a family that lived in the same town their whole life, you're going to find them there in every census, and you're going to know all those records. You're going to become very familiar with the records that are available for that area. And it's just easier to trace. If they're moving all the time, then it really becomes, particularly if the surname is common, you find them in one place, let's say in the 1880 census, they're alive still in the 1900 census, but they're not there anymore. And you don't really know where they went. You might be able to go to where their children were and trace back from there. It's really, really difficult to make sure that during the move, that you make the right jump to the right person. Again, record accessibility. Are there records for that area, or do you have to go to the courthouse, or where do you have to go to find them? That will make it easier or not. The language barrier. You don't want to start out on your Polish line, right? If you can't speak Polish, or if you don't, that's going to be harder. You noticed on my chart that I still haven't jumped the pond with the German records. I found my German family in Colorado after they immigrated. I haven't jumped back to Germany back yet because I don't know German. Jumping the pond is one of the most difficult things you can do in genealogical research. So don't do that first thing, don't start with that. Even if that is what interests you most, you're going to have to do some other things that are easier that you can get your feet wet and get used to doing research a little more.
Can I interject something, Susan, about looking at it when it's foreign language?
Yeah.
You go to wiki research. When you do the search, there's a wiki search in Family Search, and that wiki search gives you a whole bunch of tools that you can use in your search for over the pond. And I have used that to help me with keywords that are in foreign documents. So
Good.
I have been searching my Polish relatives
Good.
using the help that I have gotten out of the vocabulary, looking for the Polish alphabet, but asking, even in Google, you can get them for handwriting.
Right. Very good.
You can see and look. It's not easy, but there are tools in Family Search that will help that over the pond. So I just
Very
want
good. Thank
to
you.
aware that it's in Wiki Research.
Did everybody hear that? So she used Wiki Search. What wiki did you search for? Did you do Wiki Poland?
It gives you the whole world. You can click on whether you're looking in Europe or Asia or South America, wherever you want to look.
Right,
They give
right.
you a map of the world. You click on the continent. And then they, on the left-hand side, will list the countries that are in that continent that you want to go to.
Very good.
And then when you get to that page, they give you history, they give you the different territories that they have the research into. They give you hints on the language. They give you hints on how to contact officials in that country to try and get records, copies of records. So it's just a fabulous tool.
It is a fabulous tool, and we'll actually talk about it more in depth in another lesson. Thank you for bringing that up. WikiSearch is really a great tool that we've got. And it does help you. I don't know if you were able to hear her because you broke up for me a little bit, but let me reiterate some of it, that you don't have to be fluent in German to look at German records, or you don't have to be fluent in Polish to look, to look at Polish records, because this Wiki search, you can go to some language charts where they will have commonly used genealogical terms and have the translation for it. So if you read it in the document, you can tell what it says. There are geographic locations that you can find through WikiSearch. Recently, I was helping a friend with what was it? It was a German document, and I did pretty well using WikiSearch, figuring out what the words meant in the document. But there were some that I didn't know, and she showed them to a friend of hers who was fluent German. He said, I don't really know where these are either. These were places that he was not familiar with. So, but if you look at WikiSearch and look at the different places and what they would have been called, that can help you too. So it's definitely doable. I would suggest, and some of you might be experienced enough that you can do that right now. But if you're just, if you've just put your family in Family Search, it's not the thing to do first. It's a little more difficult. So thank you for mentioning that. Okay, we always go from the known to the unknown, and obviously that's so that we don't jump to somebody that doesn't really belong to us. But you're gonna, you started with you, and then your parents, and you probably know your grandparents. You may even know all your great grandparents pretty well. But we're not going to, let's say I know that my grandfather's father came from England. Well, I'm not going to go from my grandfather over to England and look for his surname over there. We need to go step by step and prove each connection, starting with what we do know and then going into the unknown and going backwards. Okay, so here's an example of a tree. I've just put in my great-grandfather Andrew Ogilvy Wilson I know his parents, James Wilson and Mary Summers. I know his paternal grandfather, but I don't know who his paternal grandmother was. On Mary Summers' line, I know both of her parents and I know her grandparents. I know 5 of her great grandparents, but there are holes in this tree. And so when you're looking at this, again, going from the known to the unknown, all things being equal, which, they aren't always, we're going to look at these surnames are all pretty common. Wilson is more common than Summer, but Summer is pretty common too. So there's no preference there really.
I see what she's
But I would
doing.
definitely try to find James Wilson's mother first, because the further back we go, let me just say, one of the really fun discoveries in doing genealogy is that nearly every person who's lived in modern history has a paper trail. You can find them in some record, and that's just incredible. The closer you get to our day, the more records there are. So after, usually depending on the state, in the 1910s, 1920s, you've got birth certificates and death certificates. You've got some really good, strong genealogy sources that you can use for the more recent people. The further back you go, you can imagine why they might not have kept the records. The records may have been destroyed in a fire. We just don't have as much records of people the further back you get. So start with the closer puzzle in your tree, generally speaking. The caveat to the closer you get to our day, the more records there are. The problem with that is that that's not really true because of privacy laws. And I understand why there are privacy laws, but I regularly curse them because you get to, you see a database that's got all the, say birth certificates from, 1910 to 1960. Well, why did you stop at 1960? I want to, no, but for privacy reasons, they've stopped. And I understand that that's really important to do, given the time that we live in, but it is frustrating. It is harder to find a living person than it is to find your grandparents due to privacy laws. So just keep that in mind. I'm sure you've probably come across that already. So my point is that you want to start with your closest missing ancestor in most people, in most instances. It's a general rule. There may be exceptions, and that wife of Charles Wilson may be really, really difficult to find. I don't know, but that's just a good guess. Looking at that tree, that would be where I would recommend starting. Okay, setting research objectives. Once you've chosen that line to research, you want to be very specific about your research objective. So you might say, I want to extend my Wilson line. That's my objective. Well, that's a great part to your research objective, but let's get really specific. Instead of extend my Wilson line, let's say, find the marriage record for Charles Wilson in order to extend my Wilson line. Or look for the christening record for James Wilson that would show both of his parents. Whatever record you think is going to give you the name of that, the mother of James Wilson, that's what you're going to focus in on. This ties in with intentional research. You want to see what records are available. You want to see what record you think will probably tell you what you want to find out, and then you want to search that record. So you need to become familiar with what each record will tell you. Generally speaking, marriage records they can be great if they tell you the 2 people who got married, and I find a Charles Wilson married so-and-so, that could be great. Sometimes marriage records tell you the parents, who Charles's parents were and who the wife's parents were, and that's great. That doesn't happen often, but every once in a while it does. Become familiar with what the records in that area are going to tell you, and that will help you to choose, the record to search. If you've already looked at marriage records and know that they don't really give you the parents, then if you're when you get to the point of looking for Charles's parents, you're gonna say, yeah, no, that marriage records won't help me, if that makes sense. So you'll be able to, as you become familiar with the sources in that area, you're gonna be able to decide on your specific research objective. Okay. So again, on this one, can anybody think about what records that you would use to find James Wilson's parents? He was born in 1800 in South Carolina. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with South Carolina at all. Any records that you would choose?
You can always go to the catalog
There you go. And we'll do this later.
and check and see what records that Family Search has.
Very good. Yeah. And it could be, again, James didn't live all that long. He died when he was 56 years old. And so there again, if I've got a brother or sister of his who lived long enough to inherit from Charles Wilson, I may be able to figure out, the parents and some of the siblings and all. So the more information you have, as the further back you go, the more information you're going to want about the family, and the residual connections are going to be real helpful. But yeah, and later on we'll learn a lot about the catalog and how to use that specifically. Okay, we're going to start talking about
Primary source.
sources, gauging what the sources mean and what they, well, before we get into sources, because this is really, we're going to get into this in depth next time. Are there any questions about what we've talked about? Let's talk about your trees now, and maybe what you're doing now with your trees, what searches you're doing and why you decided to do that. Any problems that you've had, any good things that have had. Let's share what we've been doing lately in terms of looking at our tree and figuring out what to do.
I have an interesting situation. I have the Brand family book, which was printed and is also in Utah, but my ancestor was stolen off the shore and brought eventually to the United States after 20 pretty rough months, as far as we know. But we don't know his father and mother. All we have is a name and a date that he was around 12 years old when he was taken in the 1700s from standing. What happened was the British pulled a ship up and asked the children, the school children standing there, if they'd like to come aboard for a tour. And they got 12 little boys aboard. Their sisters were on shore. And I'm descended from one of those boys. I have found it, oddly enough, very difficult in Scotland because it's a very common name. It's Brand. And that's where we are on my family. My husband's had a lot of trouble, but has found a lot with his German ancestors, oddly enough. Too many.
Right. Okay. Right.
Well,
Well,
I know all the
have-
descendants. Yeah.
I have heard of that, and they would do that. They would take children. Sometimes they'd ask them about their parents, and if they couldn't tell them anything about their parents, they would be taken on board and made to work.
Right. And then
Um,
they're sold, and he was sold.
He was sold, and where do you know where he came from?
Yes, and
Okay.
I know where he was sold to, and it,
Okay.
oddly enough, when they sold everyone aboard that they'd brought on, he was the last one, and it was to a Presbyterian minister. I imagine he was very sick coming over. That's all I can think of. But
Okay.
the
Sure.
minister bought him and
Yeah.
then eventually had him as an indentured servant, not a slave. But they were, obviously the ship was a man of war, as it said, and it just did everything awful. So anyone that is descended from slaves runs into this problem of where were they picked up.
Exactly.
That we can get, but we don't know anything else. So we only know all the descendants, but none of the ancestors there.
Okay. And you got that story from this Brand book?
Yes, and
It
it
was
was handed
evident-
down
Handed down.
orally,
Okay, very good.
orally.
That's so interesting. You know, one thing, after exhausting the paper trail, which really dries up pretty quickly, the conventional thinking is that in order to jump the pond, you'll find the answer to where to jump the pond to, not in jumping back to the country of origin, but finding more in the country where he belonged. And so, but in that case, you know, that becomes difficult. You know, if he had kept a diary, or if he, you know, somehow told, I'm from such and such a place. I know that in my jumping the pond, I was on my Stell line. They came over of their own free will, but I still was having trouble finding where in England they came from. And I found finally in my great grandfather's on his tombstone, it said he came from Stansfield, England. And Stansfield isn't really a town, it's a community in Yorkshire. So the conventional wisdom is that you will find the clues that you need, not by going back to England, but doing all the research you can in the country in the area where they ended up. With a story like that, you know, you can exhaust all of those records and probably not find much about where they came from. Although you might find the tombstone that says they're from such and such a place. You know, this 12-year-old kid might not even, you know, might not think that's important later in life where he came from, or, you know, it's really hit and miss finding that. So if you have exhausted the paper trail, you mentioned that there are other brands that, you know, that you don't know where you get back to. DNA can be really, really helpful with problems like this. And that is if you Google, is it BRAND? Is that the name?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There might be a brand DNA, the surname DNA study, where people, let's say you go to Scotland and get some DNA from Scotland, right? Get some people males who are brands in Scotland, and they submit their DNA, and then the ones in the United States submit their names, and there could be some matches coming up. So that is a really great way. And as far as African Americans go, this is being used for them too, because I heard years ago about Family Search International had a project that is probably ongoing, but they send people to Africa and go to the person that knows the genealogy, and it's mostly oral history, and they will, you know, and they write it down. And you've heard of this from, you know, what's the name, the Kunta Kinte, you know, the what's the name of the series?
Roots.
Thank you.
The Roots series.
Roots, right. So they would go and take those oral histories, but then they'd also swab people's mouths and get the DNA. So they've got a DNA match with that history, so that when descendants of slaves in the United States submit their DNA, that can match up with, and some of these oral histories rival any European pedigree you're going to find. They go back to the 1600s. They're really detailed and really great. And so if the paper trail is lost, that DNA is sometimes helping us make that jump back in the country to where they were. And so you might not be able to find, you know, your exact great-great-grandfather in Scotland that was named Brand, but you'll be able to know where that brand came from, and maybe know a little bit about the family in Scotland, which can be exciting. And, you know, you could possibly hook up with cousins, you know, who stayed in Scotland. Anyway, DNA is a great great thing to resort to after you've exhausted the paper search. And that comes up lacking. So,
I am fortunate to know where it happened because oddly enough, I worked there at one time. And at that time, I never thought about all of the genealogical resources.
right,
Just all I had were all of the combination family. And also my high school had a very diverse population. And for health, we were to make out these ancestry charts as far back as we knew, because they were after looking at the health
right,
of the ancestor of what might be handed down to us. We
right.
had a very popular nurse trio that did a lot with us at this high school. And I think we were kind of a test community because of that. And that was unusual in the 50s and 60s to have a group like us.
Sure.
So that has existed, and my brother used it then when he went to high school. It was
Mhm.
sort of a jumping off place for him, these huge charts that some couldn't fill out much, but some could fill out from the oral histories as well as anything else they knew. Because at that time, no one was into this like it is now.
Right.
So
That's
thank you. And I wondered so much about my African friends, African American friends,
right.
and I know they wondered too, because they had rather last names that they were going by, even then,
Right.
that
Right.
were leading them to various places, but they weren't sure where. So,
Right. I'll try to get more information for you on Family Search International, where people might be able to get that. Because that was a good 10 years ago when I first heard about that project, and I'm sure it's ongoing. But I'll try to figure out where to, you could help your friends and steer
Right.
them of where, where they might be able to turn. Because that's just a great resource to have. Something else you said made me think of something.
oh, port cities. I think ports are important because that's where the ships could pull in, whether
Right.
it's Scotland or Nigeria, or
Yep.
as my husband found, Amsterdam, some of the Le Havre in France,
Right.
Bremen in Germany. Yeah, all those port
Right.
cities are doing a lot of help for people too. But Ghana, I know the British are doing a lot with the Ghanaian ancestry.
Right.
Trying to think where else along that west coast of Africa, and a lot along east coast of India, for instance, Sri
Okay.
Lanka. Yeah, all of those areas. There's so many friends interested. We are very fortunate in Montgomery County, Texas, to have a genealogical library at the Central Library in Conroe, Texas.
Nice.
And
I've heard of
the-
Conroe, the Conroe.
the last day
Library.
we were there were two African-American women that came in, one with her husband, that
Mhm.
had the DNA. So they
Okay.
had jumping
They
off
knew how to do that.
places. Yeah.
Great. Great.
So they're very up on everything too there.
So that's a great resource for y'all that are close to Conroe. Yeah. Anybody
Sue,
else? Yeah.
this is I frequently ask this question because I keep running into this issue, so I'm always putting it out there to look for new resources. But finding women,
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Locating, finding women's records, because the further back you get, it's almost like looking, talking about the African American records or the people that were in bondage or indentured servants. But it's almost that way with women as well. And finding, do you have any new insights, or maybe go over some of the resources that we can look to find our female ancestors?
Yeah, that would be a whole class. But you're pointing to a problem, and it's legit. So maybe if I didn't know who the parents of James Wilson were, I would search for his father first, right?
Right.
Because it's and let's just say generally that the paper trail by and large is generated by property.
Yeah, and wills, that'll last
Right,
well.
anything, if there's land is worth money, and so they kept track of that, right? They couldn't not keep track of that because money is important. And so when we were talking about the geographic stability of people, if they owned property, you're going to find a lot of records about them, where people that just rented or went from place to place, not so much. And so there's definitely, poor people are harder to find, and most of us have poor people in our ancestry, and they're way harder to find. And there are ways, I've taken a couple classes on women in particular, and I wouldn't even begin to tell you what the best way, I mean, depending on your time period and what you're looking for. But that actually is an interesting idea on it maybe we'll look into that in the class, have a special, I know we talked about this last year, I think, and I never got to it, but let's see if we can do something on finding women, because all of us probably are going to run into that problem somewhere in our tree. So maybe I'll try to address that sometime.
Oh, Sue, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And by the way, I love your classes. I love your
you.
presentations. I love the way your speaking style, your approach to delivering really valuable information. So I just want to take a personal moment to say
Oh,
thank you
I
very much
appreciate that.
for all your hard work.
Bless you. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Any other people want to share something with us?
Sue, I thought I'd let you know that if you are on the main family search page, if you click on the search and go to genealogies, and then as you scroll down genealogies down at the bottom, towards the bottom, you can see the oral genealogies on there.
Oh, they're on there.
And I don't know if all of them are on there. I know they've got tons and tons and tons and tons.
Okay.
But that's where you go to look for the oral genealogies.
Okay, let's do that right now. So go to family search. And then guide me through. Where do I go now?
Sorry, click on search.
Okay.
And click on genealogies.
Okay.
And then if you scroll, well, actually, you don't have to scroll
Oral.
very far. There's the oral
Oral
genealogy.
genealogies. Okay. And then you can view all trees in this collection. Let's look at that. Oh my goodness. Wow. And is this connected to DNA at all? Do you know, or?
I don't know if it is, because I had never heard that part about collecting DNA.
Okay. I've heard a presentation at Samford, the fun place that you go to learn at Samford College. And it was the head of Family Search International, and he was telling about it. Again, this was quite a while ago, but what a great resource. And so see, these are added recently, or last updated anyway. So I'll try to find out, maybe they've got about this.
And it's interesting, at the top there, it was like over 800 files or trees, 800,000 files or trees. And so in other words, you've got a lot of people on those, which is just amazing.
Yeah. Yep. And you need it, it would be hard to jump into those trees though, if you didn't have some DNA to help you, wouldn't it? I would think. Because once you're there, you're going to, let's see what one of them looks like. So, you got to put in a name.
I mean, that is the hard part.
Yeah. So I think I'll try to figure out how DNA can help you choose what tribe you're in. But once you find that tribe, then you've got these great stories of where you come from in the Mugo Bogobo village. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. That's my assignment, to find out more about the DNA side of that. But thanks for pointing that out. I'd never seen that before. another thing that I was going to mention about genealogy and medical health, I know my brother got a counseling degree, and they did an emotional well-being family history chart. And that is, you know, as you do your family history, you can kind of, how shall I put this? You can see how dysfunctional the families were. And, you know, perhaps you can see if there's some problems in the family. And there's certain portions of my tree that were definitely disrupted by family dysfunction. And that was very helpful to my brother. He turned to me and we discussed what happened in the family. And it's real, by adding the paper trail with what we know, you know, starting with our own father and then going back. And it seems like there were problems with alcohol, but it seemed to be every other generation. So that one generation, it would usually be the father who'd be an alcoholic. And then the next generation, the kids, wouldn't touch alcohol because they'd seen what it did to their father. But then they must not have passed that lesson on to the next generation because their kids would be alcoholics and have problems. And so you can learn a lot about yourself from doing, you know, looking at stable families. I know the stable families are a lot easier to trace. And so, because they're not splitting up. I know that my grandfather ran away from home when he was 16 because his alcoholic father beat him. And my dad said he never met his dad's side of the family because he had a complete break with them. And that explained a lot, you know, getting a combination of the stories that you hear and then seeing the actual, you know, census records where, you know, yeah, he's not there anymore. And he's, you know, he should be there, but he's not. So anyway, another way that genealogies can really help us in understanding ourselves and where we are right now. Any other things that you'd like to share with us about what you've looked at in your tree and maybe what has helped you, or maybe what has, let me see if there's anybody here who doesn't have a lot of United States people that can be confirmed with census records.
Bertha would like to make a comment.
Okay.
Yes, I answered both of those questions.
Great.
My family immigrated into the United States with the Mexican Revolution. They, you know, so they went back, but the problem was they were hoping that the dictator would survive in Mexico, which he didn't. So they would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The church records have been wonderful because the original source of the family, of both families, was actually in one location. But you were going to suggest other records beyond that? In other words, this would be in Mexico and not here. And
Yeah.
maybe it's
I'm not
abroad.
familiar with Mexican sources, but we can certainly go to the card catalog and look for that.
Well, the church records are wonderful, you know, because everybody got married and had a baby.
I was going to
and
say,
everybody-
so
yeah, and death records.
in my German family, I found that they're Catholics, and Catholics kept great records.
Right, right.
And so that's a real blessing if they're, you know, I love the Lutherans, but the Lutherans didn't keep as great a record. So I was really glad that my German ancestors are Catholic, because now the problem with that is that Catholics have not made the records available in many places for us to come and copy. And so you need to go to the parish priest and see where the records are kept. I know that I've been trying to do that lately in Colorado and haven't been real successful, but making phone calls and finding out. At one point for another project, I got a hold of a priest, and he said, we've got 3 ladies who once a year will go through our records and look up any questions that anybody that's called in the last year. And so this was right after Easter, they come in. So he said he'd give them my information, and sure enough, right after Easter, they came in and they went through the records and they found what I was looking for. So it's very individual. I'm working with another individual right now in the Philadelphia area. And you need to narrow down if you've got an address where they lived in Philadelphia, so that you know what parish they were in at a certain time, then you can get a hold of those records, and they're fantastic. Depending on the priest, you know, what he wrote down, but a lot of times, as far as jumping the pond, it'll be, you know, so-and-so moved here from this parish in Germany, and we've got their records, so, and their mother and father were so-and-so, and, you know, it's really amazing what you can find in those Catholic records. So, generally speaking, church records in the United States are really, really hit and miss, unless you've got a Catholic in there. And then you'll really be able to find some great stuff. So, but it's not as accessible as other records. So, you know, you'll need to be creative in accessing those records. But yeah, so as far as, let me, I'll shoot you a note later, see if I can see if you, but have you looked at the card catalog already and looked up Mexico and to see what resources might be available besides church records?
I haven't done such a sophisticated tree. I'm working
Okay.
a little bit at a time.
Okay.
And I do find the church records are good, but you said you were going to mention something beyond the US. And so I was just saying,
Okay.
I have a situation like that.
Okay, well, let's look at search and then let's go to the catalog. And let's search. And is there a particular region in Mexico, or should we just look Mexico?
Chihuahua, the state of Chihuahua.
Right. And we're gonna search for that.
It's a big state like Texas, so you're gonna get a whole
Right.
bunch of stuff.
Okay. No, that's all right. So these are, and so you can look for places within Chihuahua and get a little more specific, but they've got some biography of people in the area. There's an index to an 1822 census. I don't know what time period they are. It sounds like you've already looked at church records. There's a civil registration record. Let's see what else. Military records.
Wow.
So I'm not, you know, what I want to see is some vital records there, and I'm not seeing that.
Can you show me how you got there? I've never
Yes.
used this before.
Sure. So if you go, let me see. This you see all the time at the very top of your page, the Family
Right.
Search logo, and that brings you back to the homepage. And then if you go to search, and then from that drop down menu, you choose catalog.
Okay.
And then you choose by place, by surname, by title, by author, but place is what I use most of the time. And then you put in the larger place first, and then you go, and then you see that.
Yeah. Okay.
And then search that.
Okay.
And-
That's good. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so
Thank
you can, and then you click on any one of these and it'll have a description of what it is. And sometimes you can look at it online and sometimes you can't, but that's, you know, this applies to everybody, that if you're looking for what records are accessible or are available to you in a particular area, you know, play around with it and see what you can find. It's kind of fun.
You mentioned you were looking for vital records. The
Yeah.
civil registration probably covers that.
Civil registration would be the closest, wouldn't it? Perhaps church records. If she's already looked at church records, civil registration would probably be the best.
Right.
Yeah. 1861 to 1997. I don't know if those dates help you at
Yes.
all,
Right.
but you could certainly see what that says. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're good. Any other questions or comments about this?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay,
Oh, sorry. My internet dropped, so you may have covered this.
okay.
I am, it's harder for me to search for females versus males.
Mhm.
Do you have any recommendation for that? Because usually the males are the head of the household, but the women kind of get lost.
Yes, they do. We did cover this before, but I'm happy to repeat. It's hard to find women, and they can get lost in a lot of different places. But generally speaking, the paper trail follows the money. And so anybody who had owned property or land or, was well-to-do, you can find records for them. Women tended to be not in that category. So there are a lot of different things we can do. It sounds like there's interest in this, and we will cover this more in depth in another lesson where we'll talk about, we'll spend maybe a half hour talking about different strategies for finding women, because it is difficult. It is, and it takes some knowledge of the records, and we'll go over that. Hopefully,
Okay, thank you. I'll wait for that. Thanks so
we
much.
don't want to leave the women out. They're very important.
Sue, I'd like to bring up another thing that I encountered in my research and looking
Okay.
for an ancestor. That there was an ancestor that just completely dropped off the radar after he committed a murder. It was well recorded in the community and in the state. His father was a previous state senator in the state legislature, so he was assisted in leaving the state.
Mhm.
But what I found was, and the reason that I'm sharing this is because it was so helpful, was I found that there were other people that were in my tree, looking for different family members. And so I reached out to one of them who was, whose name showed up frequently in my sources that were there.
Okay.
And so when I
Right.
reached out to her, what I had done previously was I had reached out to the community where he had left. And I have found fabulous resources in the small towns, in the small history and genealogical museums that are in local communities. They're tiny, but they are dedicated and they are enthusiastic. They are so willing to share information and get you extra information. I even had them go and take a picture of the house that she took a
Wow.
picture. Very
Wow.
much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so between the reaching out to the person who was doing some,
Mhm.
research and working with her and sharing what I had, and then comparing what we had discovered using newspaper articles, old newspaper articles from
Right.
newspapers.com and from the
Uh-huh.
Library of Congress
Yeah.
in tracking individuals. So don't neglect your collaboration first, the local community, small town areas where your families were from, and the newspaper resources that are out there. A lot more of them are becoming digitized and available online. And so I just wanted to bring up those three additional, approaches.
That is excellent. And you're absolutely right. A really good thing to do is, if you are working on a person and, like you said, you see someone who's doing a lot of work on it, contact them and see what tell them I'm working on this line too. You can do that by, let me just show an example.
Can you show us how?
I will
Thank you.
show you how. Yeah. Let me go to anybody in my tree. Okay, let's go to Fred and see if there's anybody but me. Okay, so here's a person that has contributed to my grandfather's. And I click on that name. Sometimes there's an email address. I can perhaps view my relationship, so I can see how I'm related to them. Let me go all the way. It's pretty far back. So, okay. So we're distant cousins. But I can message this person and say, this is my grandfather. Thank you for contributing this, to his page. And do you know anything about him that you'd like to share with me? I've done that with some English ancestors and have gotten, there's one person who lives right next to a valuable library, and he's been looking for things for me in England. So yeah, this whole tree is a collaborative effort, but you can make a lot more, you can take a lot more advantage of it if you contact the people. Now, and don't feel rejected if they don't answer. I think all of us are rather, I'm not on Family Search every day. And so I check my messages maybe once or twice a week, and so, but some people once a month, right? So if they don't answer right away, don't worry about it. Or if they don't answer at all, they may not choose to, and that's fine. But yes, using the collaboration tool that we have here. In my own family, and I didn't do this through Family Search, but I mentioned that my grandfather ran away from home when he was 16 and then didn't have any contact with his family. I have met since then cousins from his brothers' children and grandchildren. And lo and behold, there were stories that got passed down in that family that didn't get passed down to me. And that story is that Fred Stell's father was a buffalo hunter named James Stell. He went by the name of Moccasin Jim. And he was in some paintings of buffalo hunters, and he's in buffalo hunting books. He's rather famous. I had no idea because that got lost to me as it wasn't handed down in my family. So you can find story. I think I told you last time the story about Hattie Groff, and how the story handed down in my family was that her parents had been killed on a wagon train, but lo and behold, somebody else was able to tell me, no, they almost died, but they didn't, because they didn't go on that wagon train. So there are all sorts of really fun, the kinds of details that bring, like I said, bring these stories to life, you can find by collaborating. And so that's, it's part of the research, is finding these stories. Another thing that, yeah.
I was gonna say, why don't you show them on the homepage where to go, where the messages are, where they would get their incoming message, just for those who are new.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let me show you. So over here, let me scroll up. Okay, here we go. These are messages right there. So this shows me, and some of the messages are these are all from Ancestry. But yeah, they'll ping you. Here are my messages. This little icon.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's a good point. So when they answer you back, you're going to retrieve it right here. And I get a notice in my email that I've had a message given to me, so that can alert me. So that's helpful. Does everybody know about this following feature?
No.
Okay, so you notice that I'm following Fred Stell. I have I've followed him by clicking on this. I've now said I don't want to follow him, but I'm going to do it again. So by following Fred, I am notified whenever somebody makes a change to him. This is one way to control the negative side of the collaboration, and that's that somebody can come along and change it, and you don't know about it. So you can actually follow this. I'm trying to remember. Okay, so then by clicking on Family Tree and I look on following, and it shows me the changes that have been made. And I can go through and say, oh, and I can send a note to them saying, thank you for putting this in, or, hey, I don't think you're right here. This is the information I've got. Let's work on this and work together. So you can keep up with the changes that are happening to your tree and be in control of it. So it's one way mitigating the problems that can arise from everybody working on the tree together.
Could you do the, how we got there again, please?
Yes, sure.
Following.
So here's the top bar.
Mm-hmm.
This will take you to homepage. And then from family tree, I'm on my tree, this is who I'm following. So I can look at everybody I'm following and see what changes were made and when. I haven't checked it in a while, but there's some from September 3rd I haven't seen. And most of the time it's great. You're saying, okay, that's a really good to know that. Sometimes you might want to say, you know, where'd you get this information? You know, just see what they've posted and make sure that you like what they've done. But if they're attaching sources to people that are correct, then, you know, I'm not going to be one to argue with that. So again.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time here. Any other, I was going to say one other thing, and that is connecting with the local family history, genealogical societies. They have so much good stuff that you're not going to get anywhere else. And I can't state this enough. When I have exhausted what Family Search has, the records. So let's back up. Family Search reflects all of, when we go to the catalog of Family Search, that's the catalog of the Family History Library, which is the largest repository of genealogical records anywhere in the world. So you want to start there, but not everything's going to be there, even though, you know, they've done a really good job at going all over the world to get records. They're still going to be lacking. If you, and it gets expensive, if you join a local family history society or local genealogical society, and to find that, you know, all you know, just Google. I know I did. There's an Ontario Genealogical Society. Okay. You just, you know, Google an area and see if there's a genealogical society there, and get a hold of them and see, you know, there are tons of databases that they have. You know, you become a member and you get access to it. So I like to wait until I'm actually working on that line and make sure that I'm going to be able to follow through and use those databases. Like you mentioned, there are people there that are volunteers that some of them are willing to go to cemeteries, and they're willing to go to things that you can't go to Ontario to look at. And, you know, sometimes I like to give a contribution. I should have said before, when I locate a parish priest, I like to give a donation to that parish as a thank you for looking through the records for me. You know, it doesn't need to be much, just, you know, just a thank you. Anyway, there was one society that I just gave me so much information about my South Carolina ancestors, the Dutch Fork chapter of the South Carolina Genealogical Society. And I mean, this is just amazing. They've got Bible records posted here. They've got, I mean, it's just amazing. And I wouldn't find these anywhere else. So definitely Google, use the Google, and Google the area that you're interested in, either the town or the county or the area, and see if there is a genealogical society and see what's available. You'll be really, I think, pleasantly surprised by what a resource that is. So thanks for mentioning that.
Sometimes they're historical societies. They don't even.
Sometimes they're called historical societies.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
You can also look up where the family history centers are. Like, I've forgotten the lady's name in Mexico, in Chihuahua.
Uh-huh.
If you go to the top of Family Search, where the little teardrop is, anyway,
This one here?
yes, then you can type in where it is. I just looked up in
Oh, there you
Chihuahua
go.
and there's about 4 different family history centers in
Okay.
different places. So they may be local people, they may have some information, or they may have stuff in their in the family history center there that isn't anywhere else.
Look at that. Personalized help, access to technology. That's very good. So you would say, click on this and then put in the,
Discover a local center and type in Chihuahua, Mexico, and
okay.
it gave
Oh, wow.
it's
Yeah.
like 4 different, you type up there where it says search the place, and then it will take you to what's available.
Chicago, Mexico Family History Center. There you go. And
Now I just did Chihuahua, Mexico, and I didn't hit click Family History Center, and the map came up with 4 different places. that
okay,
you can zero in on.
okay. So this isn't the only one then.
No,
And
I
then-
don't think so.
And then it
According-
looks like they've got a phone number you can call. They've
Mhm.
got a website. So let's see what the website looks like. And I can't read any of this, but maybe you can. Okay.
You
So-
can translate it. If you look at the top, you can translate it to English over to,
Let's see, where does it say that? On the right or left? Oh, it's translate, I see. There you go. And there it's in English. Upcoming events. So that would be really great. You might be able to join a Zoom meeting if they've got classes. You can look at their collections. This is fantastic. Thanks for mentioning this. What a resource this is, right? So again, going to the place itself and finding people who are interested in this work, and they can be lovely, lovely resources for you. Excellent.
You're on mute, Bertha.
That's wonderful. Could you go to back to the little icon to show where we went?
Yes. So you mean from the beginning?
No, just to show the little icon that I need to click on to go to the Family Search Center.
Okay. So I clicked on website here.
Mhm.
You see that? Now,
Mhm.
Is that the one you mean, Bertha, or do you mean the
No, what I
teardrop?
meant was on the menu, on the Family Search
teardrop.
menu.
It looks
It's a
like a
teardrop. Okay, look,
This here?
that's what I wanted to see.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
good, thank you.
you're welcome. Great information, everybody. This is fantastic. Okay, anybody else have something to share here? Okay, well, I think we're going to leave looking at the primary and secondary sources and that analysis for next week, because that's going to be pretty detailed. So we'll let you go for today.